All yours, Natalie.
Thank you. I am going to set my timer. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie. I am a recovered alcoholic. I also identify as an addict, but this is an AA meeting, so I'll keep it to alcohol. But I was just really getting into those big book thumper. Like I just love how everyone's so excited about the solution that's found in this book. And you'll hear in my story, but I didn't get taken through the solution until I had a few years in sobriety. And the magic has been here all along. And I sit here today. I'm so grateful. Um, I've had conversations with a few people that I know, and they were feeling a little less excited about AA and recovery in this program. And I don't feel that way. I am so grateful for this program. Everything that I have and everything that I can be today, um, as a sober woman who tries her best to show up for work, for my family. I mean, I'm currently in Orlando. I flew here, and if you're in the East Coast, we were hit with a storm this morning, so I was stuck in the airport for a good 3 hours. And because I've recently rejuvenated my 11 step practice and I feel very close and right with God, it didn't bother me. I made friends. I made a really good friend with this older 80-year-old woman who was in a wheelchair. Her name is Elise. And we just had a great time getting to know one another. And then, I got to help her get her bag. She asked me what I was doing here. I would have missed all that if I was miserable about my flight getting delayed and all that. And I can easily get into that mindset when I'm not right with God, when I'm deeply driven by fear, by all the worldly clamors. And I've had many moments, I slip back into that state, especially when I turn away from this power. But because I continue to seek this relationship and strengthen that relationship, life is different. My experience of it is completely different. And I promise I will qualify myself as an alcoholic, and I definitely am a real alcoholic, like with the mental obsession, the phenomenon of craving, and all that. But I just feel deep in my heart, when I was meditating before this meeting, to just share about this part now before I forget about it. But especially since it's December, this year has been extremely challenging. And I don't say that to complain. I say that because in the third step, it says, I get to bear witness to God's love, God's power, and God's way of life. And I may go through even more challenging things in the future, but I know that as someone who's been uniquely tapped to be a channel for this power, to be a child of God, thanks to having worked the 12 steps, like I got to be the example of what's possible if you have an awakening. And this year has been challenging. It started in November of last year. I have a very small family unit. It's my parents, me and my dog, and my parents are hardworking immigrants from the Philippines, and they like sacrificed a lot for what I have today, for the gifts that I have today. And our relationship wasn't always that easy. And they were number one, my mom and dad were number one and number two on my resentment list for years until recently. They're not, they didn't even make it there. Um, but last year they had to sell their business and declare bankruptcy. And at the same time, my dad was undergoing some mental health problems. And I immediately felt fear, crippled by it, felt despair, and like I don't know what to do. And this past year has been a lot of me partially scared because sometimes I don't know how to financially help them to pay for my rent which goes up, and I wasn't making that much money and like all that. And there are other things that happen throughout the year, but I have to say the challenging aspects of this past year has been an opportunity for me to really lean into God. And throughout this past year, especially towards the last bit of it, I don't want to say I've never felt closer to God because God's always been close. It's just me that's in me and my little ego and chatter that's in the way. Um, but I get to look back and even be grateful for the challenges because it forced me to seek this power and not seek outside things because there was nothing outside that I could seek. There was no, I mean, I wasn't going to win the lottery or anything. Like, all I could do during many of those moments when I was completely helpless was pray, cry, you know, lean. Literally, I would lean into my pillow and just like pray and talk to God until I fell asleep. There were many of those moments. And, I not once have I wavered in my faith. I was scared, but I brought God in that fear. And, life has taken on a whole new meaning because of that. I did get a new job and things did turn out well. But that's not what matters. Because, like, even before I got the new job, I reached this new place of surrender where I had a conversation with God. And this was while I was waiting to hear from a prospective job. And I was in a state of uncertainty and a lot of unknown. But I reached this place of surrender where I had a conversation with God, being like, I don't know what's going to happen. If it doesn't turn out well, I'm still going to trust you. I don't care because my ego is what thinks it's not going to turn out well. Whatever it's going to happen, it's what's meant to be, but I'm just going to fully trust you. Because so far I've had a 100% survival rate with everything that's been thrown my way. Um, and even if I didn't get the job, even if things didn't work out, I still reached that level of surrender that led me to peace and the feeling of being content with my life, that my life might not look like anyone else's, but it's my life. Like, I get to have this kind of life where I get to take care of my parents. It's not I have to, I get to do these things and I'm so grateful. So now I'm going to qualify myself as an alcoholic because that is not how I thought and lived even when I was sober, but definitely not when I was drinking, and when I was out there. I was selfish, self-centered, and just driven by the different demands, the fear that I now know. Now I now have realized it's really just fear, but it shows up in so many different ways, like um, little monkeys with driver's licenses driving me. I don't know why I came up with that metaphor, but that's what it is. And I had my first drink when I was 16, in New York City, and I always share that I could have used a drink way before that. I my earliest memories is just me, so uncomfortable in my own skin. There was love. I was born in the Philippines, and yes, my mom did leave me at a young age to work as a nanny here in the US, and my dad wasn't really present, and I was brought up by a bunch of strangers, and there was some inappropriate things that happened that I'm still tackling once in a while. And but despite that, there was love and I had everything I needed. But no matter what happened to me, that feeling of being different and not fitting in my own skin and the constant need to, the biggest theme that I think of, and this follows me deep in my alcoholism when I was in the throes of a bender, is this constant feeling of wanting to crawl out of my skin. That was it. Um, and I feel like I sought oblivion to escape that feeling or to enable me to think that I was outside of myself. But I didn't want to be in my present circumstance, and I avoided that at all costs. I was, I did not like my reality, and anything to numb that, or disguise that was great. So before I had my first drink, I sought different ways to make sense of whatever was going on. Because again, I did not know what was wrong with me. And when I say I'm a grateful alcoholic, it took me hitting my bottom for me to finally realize what was wrong with me when someone took me through the first step. You know, I'm grateful. Because otherwise, I don't know how I would have been. I would have been so grouchy in the airport today, useless to society. But I fantasy was my first way of escape. Anything to get me out of my present circumstance. Disney princess. I mean, I'm going to Disney World tomorrow, but like anything to not be Natalie. Like my reality felt so uncomfortable. And, later on, I moved to the US and I tried, this constant feeling of discomfort that I made no sense of. And I've since come to realize that, we call that maybe perhaps the spiritual malady, this delusion. And I'm stealing this from Alice, or maybe she stole it from someone else, but this delusion that I'm disconnected from God. And because of that delusion, I think I'm alone and I have to do everything. And life just is miserable because of that delusion. Um, but I didn't know that was what was going on. I tried to make sense of this pain. I dabbled in eating disorders, self-harm, and other things. And I recently had this realization. My mom was really big into watching Lifetime movies growing up. And I don't know if any of you guys watch Lifetime movies, but there's always like an issue going on in a Lifetime movie, like someone's going through some sort of problem. And I remember watching those with her and sitting on the couch being like, maybe that's what's wrong with me. Nope, another movie. Maybe that's what's wrong with me. Like I did not know. And I had my first drink at 16 and it was disgusting. And then I felt the effects of alcohol and I could finally breathe. I could finally sit still and maybe I could actually keep on living. There's a line, and I love that Eric brought up excerpts from Bill's story, but I've recently had an experience with this line in Bill's story where I think it was the first stock market crash and everyone was jumping off the buildings. And Bill's like, no, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to the bar and drink. And, life was so unbearable for me when I was a teen. And when alcohol came into the story, that made it okay. Like that was the solution. And I had found it and I knew it was going to be the solution. Um, but my progression of I think my progression was a little slower in the beginning and it really reared its ugly head um, after college, especially as like drugs came into the picture. But I mean, I don't need to really look into every single detail of exactly when I developed the allergy. I just know I have it. I just know that today and the last many years before I got sober, there was not one time where I drank and did not get thirstier. Like I knew that. I don't know when that happened. I don't need to know that part. There's no going back, but like I crossed that line. But the progression was slow, and I just knew I found my solution. And I do want to fast forward to like me coming in. I came in on March 25th, 2019, and relapse in the rooms is not part of my story, but there have been absolutely many attempts of me trying to control my drinking, trying to not drink, trying to be a moderate drinker, trying to drink like my friends who are heavy partiers but still made it to their commitments the next day. Um, but no, as the book said, I am a real alcoholic. Like there was no power, choice, and control, and there was no stop as soon as a drop entered my system. And that I think that started to progress later on in my 20s and as life happened, I before I get into my recovery, like my earliest memories of, I would go out to happy hour with my coworkers and we would have the same drink, a beer, a wine, but like something different happens to me that doesn't happen to them. And I'm going to say grateful throughout this entire story because I really am grateful for the solution. I'm grateful this book was written, and I think it's divinely inspired because when I remember when I was drinking with my, during those times when I was trying to drink like my coworkers, when I was trying to be a normal drinker, I honestly felt there was, that movie Alien. I thought there was an alien inside of me, like something else woke up as soon as I had a drink. I did not know what it was. That's how insane I thought I was. We just call it the phenomenon of craving. Not to make light of it, but like, I knew there was something different, but like I fought that. I fought that being like, no, you're just being dramatic. Maybe you just need to drink water after each drink, or maybe set an alarm, or maybe sign up for an early morning workout or dance class the next day, which I did. And, I lost a lot of money because I never made it to those classes, but I thought I could, fight it, and I really couldn't. And I just was so at a loss. And I also beat myself up. When I came in, I came with a lot of guilt, shame, and remorse, and a lot of self-hatred for the things that I missed out on because I thought that I chose to continue drinking. Like, there were many weddings, many flights, many booked vacations with friends, many commitments to my parents. Deep down, when I said yes, sober, hopeful Natalie wanted just to show up to all those commitments. I knew deep down I was an accountable person that cared for people, that people can, take me for my word, and that I actually made it to those things. But as soon as I started drinking, my next priority was the next drink, and then the next drink, and then the next drink. And the progression got worse and worse because that next drink started to get longer and longer. Like, it went from showing up to work hungover to showing up to work drunk to not showing up to work at all to my drinking benders lasting 2 days to 3 days to a whole week. And to having excuses for my boss. And I had a conversation with Donna, my sponsor, about that, how like I would come up with these elaborate excuses. I mean, back in her day, she had to use a payphone, but I could just text out a long essay of like how many aunts and uncles I have that I need to take care of, whatever the lie is. But like it got worse and worse, and it got to a point where I couldn't even be bothered to write an excuse or to call because I am too far gone. And I hated that about myself because my life was starting to crumble. And at the same time, I was doing, the consequences of my drinking was piling up. I was crossing lines that I swore I would never cross, like putting myself in extremely dangerous situations that I normally wouldn't. Um, and doing things as a woman in New York City who's in her late 20s, um, that I would wake up the next day, be completely disgusted with myself. Like, who does that? Uh, and I was hoping that maybe those things would be enough to get me to stop drinking. I really wish that like me coming to from a bender, begging myself that this has to be the last, most disgusting, horrific, terrible thing you've done, Natalie. This has to be the thing that gets you to be sober, to not pick up a drink again. And I really wished it was, because there were many times and, so many moments of me staring at myself in the mirror with like tears running down my eyes. And, I'm so graphic about this because I recently found a photo I took of myself during one of these moments where I am just begging myself to let this be the last time. You know, how many more people am I gonna hurt? How much more could I debase myself? Like, how much worse does it have to get? Like, how much lower does my bottom have to get for me to stop drinking forever? And I still thought at that time that it had something to do with my morality or self-knowledge or willpower. Like, why can't I just figure this out on my own? Because that was what was instilled in me. If you study hard, you get the results that you want. If I go to the gym and work out and follow a program, I get the results that I want. Why isn't it working with my alcoholism? Why isn't me reading all about the effects of alcohol and drugs on my body, reading all about the self-help quit literatures and listening to podcasts every day or having a playlist that has inspirational songs that like I would listen to all day. Like if I trained my mind to be in this mindset of wanting to stay sober, why do I still go back to the drink? Like it just takes one little thought to break that control. And that was the hardest thing for me to really come to terms with the fact that I can't even trust my mind when I'm in the throes. You know, my unrecovered alcoholic mind, that the disease is centered in that, and that no amount of me studying my way, because I'm all about self-knowledge. Like here, years later, I can still fall victim to the delusion that I can study my way to God. And it's not that too. Like I am constantly humbled by my mind. um, and I now know that when I walked into my first AA meeting on March 25th, 2019, because it wasn't my worst drunk of all my drunks. I've had worse weekends before. It was a simple weekend, a simple weekend. And it's sad that I'm gonna compare this to like other worst drunks, but it was a weekend where it was my cousin's birthday, and I promised my parents that I would show up um, on Sunday afternoon for like a light pizza party because my cousin had just lost his mom, and my parents wanted to, do something for him. And by that time, I knew that if I drank on a Thursday, I would not make it to that pizza party on Sunday afternoon. But I drank on a Thursday. I tried to not make it to the bar or to the liquor store. I tried to speed walk my way home, but the thought entered my mind, and it could be any thought, or it could be no thought at all. Like my feet led me straight to a bar. Or this particular time, like one lie that always got me to a bar is your future husband will be there. Like that always got me to the bar. Because again, I was in the delusion that I just need a love life to save me from the throes of my nonstop spiral to despair and my alcoholism. And I was constantly waiting for that thing to save me. And no, I drank on Thursday. Then I kept drinking. Then I kept drinking. Then other things came in. And I remember FaceTiming, and I do have this FaceTime, and it shows up as a Facebook memory right before my anniversary a lot because my parents didn't know that I was drunk, but they were so happy to have a FaceTime with me and them celebrating with my cousin, and it's me like at my bottom, pretending that I was sick with a sore throat, but really I was just still coming down from a bender, and it haunts me. So that wasn't the worst drunk because it's been worse than that. But for some reason, I made it to a meeting that following Monday. And there have been many times that I had researched AA meetings. There had been many times that I tried to, like I've shared, to stop drinking. But none of those clicked. But for some reason, on this day, I kept walking. I went downstairs. I asked someone where the beginners AA meeting was, and I went to that meeting. And I know, well, I think um, that had nothing to do with me. Like that was fully God like pushing me, and I was just finally open to be pushed into that meeting. And I experienced hope sitting in that AA meeting because I had spent my life living like this foreign being that could not control her drinking, could not control as soon as she started, and could not stay stopped if I was sober for even like an hour or a few days. I couldn't stay stopped. My mind constantly kept me drinking. And, people were sharing their truth at that meeting. And that was the first time I felt hope because I felt so broken and disgusted with myself and completely confused about what was wrong with me. And no one else in the world had verbalized what I was going through on the inside, but there's a group of people similar to this meeting that had the right language and that actually verbalized exactly what I was going through at that moment. And the coolest thing is they were speaking from a past tense. They no longer live like that. They were sober a few months, years, decades, and even a week was a big deal to me, and I felt hope. So I figured, if I just keep going to these meetings, like I found my people, like I might be okay. Um, but then, there's me, not wanting to do anything. I was willing to go to meetings. I was willing to be a meeting maker, what is it? Makers make it person. I was not willing to do the 12 steps. I was did not want anything to do with God. Um, Whenever someone said the word God in their share, I tuned out and I only cared for the stories. And I had a really rough beginning to my journey, but looking back at it now, I still wouldn't change a thing. I don't suggest it for any newcomer whatsoever. If you've been handed the solution, like my sponsor Donna would say, like the spiritual tools are laid at our feet, but it's up to us to be humble to bend down and pick them up. It took me a few years in sobriety to be humbled to pick them up. Because I can now honestly say with a group of people that some of you I know, some of you I don't, my ego is like up here. And I wanted to be God. I wanted to stay my own higher power in AA. I was going to go to meetings, but I'm going to do it my way. I don't need a sponsor and all that. And Joanne's here. So I counted days with my friends, and I call out Joanne because I counted days with my friend Joanne, and she actually got a sponsor and worked the 12 steps. And I remember she was telling me how it was going through her fourth step, and I was like, "What is a fourth step? I don't want to do that." And I was experiencing her changing before my eyes. Like she was having a new perspective on life, and I was dry, still a tornado, roaring my way through the world, probably miserable to be around, and absolutely crazy and not recovered. Like there's that line. One of my favorite lines is not Roland Hazard's, Carl Jung's description of a spiritual experience and their solution, this like emotional displacements and rearrangements. There were no arrangements and displacements happening in me with 6 years of sobriety and no 12 steps and also no God. And so, that planted a seed, like maybe this thing might work because, my friend's changing and let me give this a try. And, so my journey started. I started opening up to the idea of getting a sponsor or maybe opening this thing called the Big Book. And, because I do have the time, I just, I've had many loving, well-meaning sponsors, and I've now come to know that like we guide people the way we were guided. Um, but now, as a recovered alcoholic who identifies as a real alcoholic, who has, that mental, physical, and spiritual disease, like it is my responsibility to be that person in meetings because there's other real alcoholics in the meeting that need that solution, just like I needed it. But there were so many loving guides and sponsors I've had early on in my recovery that tried to take me to the way they were taken through. And, you know, my earliest one, we didn't go through the big book because she wasn't taken through the big book. She wanted to try out a book by Russell Brand. So that's how I was taken through the steps. And, I laugh at that now, but like, yeah, there are places where this solution is not available. And, sometimes when I don't feel like going to a meeting, especially an in-person meeting in New York, because it's cold or because I'm lazy, I have to remind myself that, like, there might be a suffering real alcoholic in that meeting whose life I can save. Not to like toot my own horn, but like, I've been given this opportunity because I'm uniquely qualified to identify with that alcoholic and to give them hope to share that it is possible to live a life where I'm not thinking about drinking and I'm not thinking about not drinking and I'm free. And, I get to be that example. And, I had another well-meaning, very loving sponsor take me through the 12 steps the first time I was taken through it. And I don't know, it wasn't really through the big book, and I didn't really understand the whole point of working the 12 steps. At that time in my sobriety, I thought it was so that I could just check it off a list and say, I worked the 12 steps. Now I can have the applause, the love, the admiration, the respect. Because again, driven by fear and ego. I worked the 12 steps for that purpose. And I was somehow missing the whole point that, like, I work this because I don't have power and I need access to power. And like it says that in the big book. It says that in We Agnostics, like lack of power is my dilemma. And this is what this book is about, to help me gain access to this power that can solve all my problems. But like I missed that. So I was taken through the work, and I had finished the 12 steps, and without the foundation of seeking this power, like imagine writing a fourth step, not knowing why I was writing a fourth step. I somehow missed that I wrote this fourth step to see the causes and conditions of what was blocking me off from this power, because I need access to this power. I thought I could write the fourth step at that time as a way for me to know how to fix myself. So now I know what's wrong with me, so I'll just do opposite actions and not do that. And I'll fast forward. What happened is, I worked the 12 steps, and perhaps that was the experience I needed to have, because again, I wasn't humbled enough yet to really seek the solution. And I was almost 3 years sober, and I didn't really have a relationship with this power, with God. When I was taken through the second step, that well-meaning guide told me, just connect back with your old conception. And my old conception is I grew up Catholic, and the idea of God that was instilled in me when I was young was this punishing, scary, you are bad and you have to you constantly have to earn love, and you know you you have to repent 24/7 because you are bad. That was the idea of God that was instilled in me. And when I had almost 3 years of sobriety and struggling with life, throwing life things at me because life happens, and self-reliance had completely failed me because I thought I had power, but I had no power. And I had well-meaning friends tell me it's a third step problem. You just have to throw your will and care of life or something like that, over to the care of God. Your life and will over to the care of God. And I was like, okay, but like I'm not gonna throw that to a God that I'm scared of. Like I can't access this God. Like what else am I gonna do? And I was faced with the fact that I had no power. That like I really truly need to gain access to power, and it took that long in my sobriety, partially because I wasn't willing to die to self yet, and partially because I wasn't, taken through by someone who had an experience, a deep and effective spiritual experience. And I experienced a lot of pain during that period, living in a delusion that I had power. Um, and I just remember, there's this line in the book, something about what seemed at first a flimsy reed is the loving and powerful hand of God. And before that, it's still the Roland Hazard and Carl Jung conversation. I really love that example, don't I? Um, but it's him saying like we seek this escape like a desperation of drowning men. And I just have this image of me like drowning in the realities of my life. And I am seeking external things to make myself okay, when really that's not the answer. It's, like I just told you what my past year has been. How I approach that has been so different compared to how I approached it this many years ago. And I was so miserable because life was hard that I thought maybe getting a boyfriend that I didn't like would help me, or maybe moving apartments would help me, maybe adopting a dog would help me, maybe maxing out credit cards and buying everything would help me, maybe getting more sponsees would help me, maybe chairing large meetings in person would help me, because if the world saw that I was Miss AA and I look good on the outside, maybe I'll feel good on the inside. And that was a belief system that I was operating on for so many years. And thanks to inventory, I saw that like that belief system does not work. Um, that it really is an internal job. It's not outside in, but like going from the inside and letting that ripple out. But I didn't know that. And it's not that, I write inventory to shame myself. It's just that I write inventory so I can see that like this is the best I could do on my own power. But I could do so much better if I'm plugged into God. Um, and that's where I was at that point in my sobriety. And I've only recently been open and sharing this. At that point, almost 3 years, I was making plans to kill myself. I was smiling and looking good on the outside, but I was dying and ready to end it. And I remember standing in front of in a liquor. I left a meeting because the guy I was dating at the time was sitting next to another ex-boyfriend of mine, and like I was just miserable. And I was like, why am I in this meeting? So I left the meeting, and it was raining, and I walked into a liquor store, and I'm staring at this wall of wine, being like, I know you're not my solution, and like, thank God I didn't want to drink them, but I also didn't want to live. And I was ready to kill myself. And, that I think I look back at my story, and that was the thing that made me bend down and pick up the spiritual toolkits laid at my feet, because I started to hear when people talked about God, I stopped tuning it out. I started to see the joy and the light come out of the people who had a relationship with this power, who've had a deep and effective spiritual experience, who've been taken through the work as laid out in the clear-cut directions in this book. Like I started to hear that message either because I hadn't heard it before or I just wasn't ready. Either way, I'm so grateful I heard it, because then I was introduced to this way of work, going through the work where I got to spend 9 weeks on step one. The first few times I was taken through the big book, I wasn't really taken through the big book, but the first few times I worked the steps, step one took like one sitting. No, we spent 9 weeks because I need to know. That foundation has to be solid. The foundation on which I build the spiritual structure has to be solid. You know, the cement, what is it saying in the fifth step? Well, I'll know it when after I go through my fifth step. I'm here. Side note, I'm here in Orlando because I'm in the work again this year. I don't know for how many time already, but I'm in the work again, and I'm doing a fifth step with my sponsor. She's here on Tuesday, and are there rocks in my? I'm not even gonna try to. My mind is, but my foundation had to be solid, because that was, I needed to have a step one experience to propel me forward, because it is in my deep step one experience that I became so hungry for this power, this God, as however you call that power. Everything I do is in seeking this relationship with this power and continuing to clean the channel so that I can have access to this power. And that was the foundation that propelled me forward. And the 9 weeks was so worth it. I wouldn't change a thing. And I think that pain that I felt at that time of like realizing that even sober, I don't have power to run my life and I was in danger of drinking and dying. That was the level of humility that I need to get to for me to actually sit down and be in this workshop and go through the work line by line, transcribing my book, turning the statements into questions, answering those questions with full sentences, really digging deep into my truth. Because now I can't like unsee what I've seen. Like when I look at this big book right now, I don't see it as a foreign third material. Like I see my story in this book. Like my truth is in here. The solution for me is in here. And it's not that I worship the book. No, this is just a treasure map to the treasure being this relationship with God. Yes, have we tried to make mortar without sand? Thanks, Shantae. That's great. See, Big Book Thumper champion is still at work. But this was the treasure map that I needed. This is what opened me up to having the relationship with God that I have now, which is why, once again, for the millionth time, I'm grateful for every single drop of alcohol I had, every bottom that I hit when I was out there, and even in my untreated alcoholism, because it brought me to the solution. It brought me to the 12 steps. It brought me to the relationship that I have with God today that led me through this past year, where it could have turned out differently, but I had faith throughout, and I'm grateful for that. But anyways, so I worked the steps that time through, and you know, I'm really I'm so like I feel like I'm just gushing about gratitude this entire share. But I really am grateful I was taken through the work that way. And like I said, I finally understood what was wrong with me, what made me a real alcoholic, and also the spiritual malady, the condition that I needed to heal from. In that part in the fourth step where it says that when the spiritual malady is overcome, we strain out mentally and physically. Like, I love that line because it reminds me that I do this so that I could stay in fit spiritual condition, so that my mental obsession is not activated and I can stay clear and clean of alcohol. And because of that, I get to be free. And, it was the foundation that propelled me forward. And also, like, as I continued through the steps and as I got through the third step, and I truly, for the first time, understood that the third step was not just the third step prayer. The third step was a decision that I was going to be done playing God. And I needed to go through everything that I went through for me to really be done playing God. Because by that time, I was like, I can't play God. And I can't. I failed. I utterly failed. I don't want to do it anymore. So you take the wheel. You're my employer. You're my director. You're my principal. I'm here. I will be your hands and feet. And when I'm right with God, when I'm actively doing my 10th step on a regular basis and prioritizing my 11th step practice and actively working with others, and I'm right with God, I truly can walk around this world with an open, undefended heart and be God's agent. But when I'm not, oh, my third step column is activated and I walk around. You do not want to be around me. And I say that because I still go in and out of that state. Like and I guess, progress, not perfection, right? And this is why we have the 10th step. Because sometimes, and I'm really good at beating myself up because I turn away from God a lot. Usually when things are really good, I turn away from God because I'm like, I don't need you anymore. But then I start to experience what that life is like. And then I get honest and I tell my sponsor and I turn back to God and I seek that power as if nothing else mattered because I know the alternative is drinking and dying and living on self-will, and that's not no way to be. Oh wow, time went by. I had 2 minutes. All right, so I'm gonna end those 2 minutes. That really went quickly. Okay, I already talked about what this past year has been like. I really am so grateful for this process. I'm gonna say gratitude again. But I'm able to show up for whatever life has in store for me, the good and the bad. And there will be bad. I'm not kidding myself, there won't be bad. But I can do that because I'm plugged into power. That's been a promise, and I've really experienced that. I've been able to show up for life this year because of that. And I recently shared a meeting and I ended with a third step prayer, but this is really where I'm living at today and what I'm striving to be because I'm in the work again and I went through the third step again. I mean, been taken through the third step again in a completely different way that really blew my mind this past year. Um, but in the third step prayer where it says, build with me and do with me as you will, or something like that. See, I'm already butchering it. Give me a second. Build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. And I always used to think that was me and God construction workers building the story together. But no, today I'm seeing it as I am the bricks from which God builds. Like like I said earlier, I am God's hands and feet. I am his vessel. I am his agent. And I stole this from a friend, but I like to call myself a badass agent. I get to be not only the example of the big book to everyone that experiences me on a daily basis, but I get to be an example of God's love to everyone else that gets to experience me. Just like as I was in the airport today and people are miserable because we're a 3 hour delay, I got to have a really nice conversation with my friend Elise, and we had a great time. Um, and that's how I get to show up as God's agent, devoid of Natalie's little demands for this world. That's all I got. Thanks for letting me share, Eric.